PhD weekly log, week 14. So a short one this week because I've left at the absolute last minute. Got back from Tasmania and immediately got swamped with the life admin I've been putting off, which is probably half of the reason the literature review was so productive while I was down there. Catching up on work and other events, continuing the literature review ever since I figured out this method of listening while I get my hands busy. Very, very effective. Still managed to get through another 12 studies this week, so it's getting there. We're past 50. That's good. Probably not as good as it should be, but hey, progress is progress. We have officially passed the point at this point where things are starting to not change my perspective and are starting to reinforce or add detail to how we're going to approach this. I got to sit down with the supervisor Matteo on Tuesday in person. We're going to run through where my head's at right now. And I think, depending on what the response is to at that point, I will then maybe do a short video here about where the headspace is at and where we're going. He's been encouraging me to think about monitoring and evaluation at this point, or as he termed it, how do we know if this program is successful or not, or any given ethical intervention is successful? Monitoring and evaluation. So that's got me plenty to do, and at that point, if all goes well, I'll maybe give a little update here, but also we'll be looking at probably moving into the second phase of the literature review, which will focus much less on intensive reading and more in high volume summarized reading, because we'll know what we're looking for at that point. We also need to start shifting gear and getting out and interviewing people, because I'm now at the point, I think, I'm now at the point where I know enough about what's going on that I won't make an idiot of myself. I'll ask the right questions. Won't waste everyone's time. But where I'm certainly not aware of everything that's going on. And so getting some insights there will be incredibly helpful. Start fleshing and getting a fulsome view, start finding out who else I need to talk to, what else is going on. Most importantly, considering the emergent nature of all this tech and the field, what's in the works that hasn't already been published. So, very interesting there. The summary of the literature thus far. Again, there's been a hell of a lot of studies this week. So, and I've gone to a seminar as well down at Monash Uni with the philosophy department down there on democracy and AI. Interesting. An extraordinarily thorough and on point analysis of the problem. Wasn't so compelled by the solution that was proposed, but again, that's kind of the whole thing right now. Is that we've got enough history and context and background that an analysis can realistically be done quite well. Risk analysis of the various risks and problems and issues that are emerging out of this. But the solutions are new and untested. And so, for example, the solution that was proposed by this fellow given this talk was removing anonymity from the internet, or from social media in particular, which is meant to improve accountability. That ain't going to work. I see the appeal, I see the theory, but the literature, as well as my own experience, one, that's going to cause its own huge raft of issues. Two, it's flat out not going to work. The real research assistant work I've been doing for Matteo around sovereign citizens, it's on Facebook. Their names and their details are all readily identifiable to the point where, honestly, I'm pretty sure I could track down where they live in a lot of these cases. And they just say whatever. That might be an age thing. It might be an education thing. Who knows? I'm sure you more hardcore extremists don't make that mistake, but maybe they do, right? I mean, that was one thing from my experience with the police is that as soon as as they put it, they don't catch the smart criminals. So as soon as you're on their radar, you're essentially stuffed because it's so easy for them to gather information. And then they just have to put you into an interview room, apply the peace method, and you'll almost certainly crack without even realizing you're doing it. At that point, you turn over your accomplices, and it's just a matter of time. The smart ones don't get onto people's radar in the first place. Either that, or have, engaged in sufficiently white-collar crimes that they don't get prosecuted in the first place. Either way, cynicism coming out there. So, that is the game. I think we now have enough context. I now have enough context to understand the nature of the problem in detail and formulate a pretty comprehensive solution. It's not radically different from where my head was at the start of all this. But interesting, as I've mentioned on here a couple of times, the whole idea of power dynamics, I'm starting to think that might not be as relevant as I originally thought. where I was originally going to apply that was in the idea of targeting the leadership of these organizations or movements more so and more intensely. That's not a very controversial idea, as it turns out. um, oh, yeah, some of the interesting reading from the last couple of weeks. So, these two studies are a bit out of date, but Jay and Berger, once again, did an audit of ISIS's use of Twitter and also did an audit of the far right's use of Twitter. Now, that's respectively about 10 and 7 years old, respectively, but it does give you an interesting slice of where things were at that time, but particularly how they engage with it. There's been also another subsequent study looking at crossovers, ideological crossovers, called The Age of Incoherence. Excellent paper, strongly recommend. It's a Department of Homeland Security paper, came out a couple of years back. It's pre-Trump, what a surprise. Talking about ideological overlaps, and the what do they call it? Salad bar ideology. That's a fascinating term. Grab bag of ideology, basically. There is apparently a surprisingly large number of far right extremist groups that have latched onto jihadist terminology and Islamist and ISIS terminology and think they're fantastic. Now they claim to be LARPing, which is to say it's covering up with sarcasm and humor, but that's not going to be a viable defense if we look at this seriously. But nonetheless, the whole for those who aren't familiar with here's a new term for you: Schrodinger's douchebag, where you are joking unless you get a positive review, unless there's a positive reception, at which point all of a sudden you're not joking, you're actually serious. I'm sure you'll see that technique used a lot online if you look for it. So, yeah, we're starting to get a bit of a picture of the extremist networks, their shape and how they engage, and it's starting to look like AI has already been used fairly thoroughly to detect and monitor and track them down, so that's good. Starting to get a very thorough understanding of the existing ethical frameworks available, and we're also starting to get a bit of an idea of the interventions available. Now, what's clear is that while a number of those interventions have been successfully applied, empathetic counterspeech is one that's been specifically tested and been very effective. Inoculation or pre-bunking, also very effective. Shadow banning as opposed to just outright banning, again, very effective for your top end, your leaders. So there's a selection, but they haven't necessarily been deployed strategically. A lot of the time they've just been deployed individualistically and experimentally, and we're not really clear on whether they worked or not, or to what degree they worked or not. Actually, Matteo has done some previous work where he looked at hard and soft interventions, as they call it. Hard being bannings, soft being counter speech, or pre-bunking in his case, or inoculation. And the combination, not terribly surprisingly, but good to have the evidence, the combination turned out to be the most effective strategy compared to the one or the other. What I'm looking at suggesting is a very comprehensive strategy that employs all of these with specific targets, with specific rationales, and monitoring and evaluation mechanisms for each, both for individuals and the group as a whole. So, still a lot of work to do, but we're making good progress. Anyway, next week.